Hi, I'm Kelly, and I'm here with Karen, and we're here to answer your questions about grief. Make sure you subscribe so you can stay up to date on all of our latest videos that we release every Wednesday and Saturday. So, Karen, today's question is for you, and it is: my spouse was initially supportive at first, but now thinks I should be over my grief.
Yeah. So, we come at this from so many different angles. And a lot of times in the individual work I do and the group work I do, I'm sure same for you. Like, the biggest topic, if you say to a person, what's your challenge? Well, it's this grief. It's the fact that I'm, having to go through this loss. I'm missing this person. I'm lost without them and trying to figure out how to be here and move forward. But then there's more, then there's also family members and spouses, partners, people that we are needing to continue to have a life with and interact with. And with the passage of time, it becomes, more difficult, I think, to find some of that understanding. We've touched on this, I think, a little bit before, but this is really specific. And I see it most frequently. Of course, there's any number of different scenarios, but most frequently in the case of a person who has maybe lost a parent, and then their spouse was maybe initially supportive of them and understanding, but very quickly kind of moves on and expects you to as well. What's hard about this is that our homes need to be sort of our safe space. And we do need to feel, or we hope to feel, that if anybody's going to understand, if anybody's going to make this feel okay, it's going to be the person that I've partnered my life with, the person that I've married. And that's not always the case. In fact, I think sometimes it's less likely to be the case. And I've tried to think about why that would be. I mean, let's face it, like, we choose people to be in our lives for all of our lives, hoping they're going to, be supportive of us, take care of us and everything. But I think the idea of the partnership is what really matters here. And bottom line is that your partner met you, fell in love with you, became very accustomed to your quirks and your characteristics, and knows you better than anybody. And now you are very, very different. And so, one, they're probably struggling with that. The other part of it, I think, is that oftentimes our partners are kind of 50-50. And so I hold up a certain part of the household, you take care of another part of the household. And let's face it, we've talked about the fact that when you're grieving, you are exhausted and unmotivated and unfocused and struggling to keep up and get things done. And your partner's looking at you like, hey, we need you. Like, all right, we got you some time, and but we need you back on the team. And I don't know, I like to think of it that way, because rather than thinking, oh, this person's just like this insensitive jerk, it's like they're struggling too. But I do think it's really, really common. So I don't know. Give me some of your thoughts. There's so much to say about it, I feel
There
like.
is. Well, I think a lot of times, our spouse, our partner wants to be able to help us. And sometimes with grief, there's really not a lot that they can do to
Right.
to make it better, right? Grief is something that we have to feel and kind of go through. And really, there's not a lot that you can say that's going to take, there's nothing you can say that's going to take away your grief, right?
Right.
And so I think that sometimes can be a struggle because they think they're being supportive, but then they kind of are like, oh, I don't know how to help.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think for a spouse, it's just about being there, being present, checking in, asking how they're doing, what they need. It's little things like that that can go a long way. I've also many times invited the spouse or the partner to come into a session
Yeah.
because sometimes we can do a little grief psychoeducation because maybe your partner has never experienced a loss before and they don't understand grief. And so they think you should be over it because it's been 6 weeks or whatever. And so they might need a little grief psychoeducation. And then one of the things I always ask, what do you need from them?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times that's not always asked
Yeah.
or even given. So this gives them that opportunity to maybe start that dialogue
Yeah.
and help them understand what they're experiencing a little differently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it really does come down to, like, a helplessness that people feel. And, it's like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. And, there maybe isn't necessarily that communication. Interestingly, I had a woman in the group saying, she's like, yeah, but is it my job to have to educate him on this? Like, I'm the one going through it. And now I have to teach him how to take care of me and how to help me, which is a good question. And it's a fair question. And I kind of like hate to answer it, but I almost sort of want to say, like, yeah, it is. Like, I mean, not that it's your job, but it's to your benefit if you can at least help this person understand. And it's not about teaching as much as it's about communicating and just say, listen, I appreciate that. Like, and I always say, like, start by thanking a person for being so supportive, even if it only lasted 2 days. Like, hey, I really appreciated the support and everything that you were giving me early on. Um, but I want you to understand, like, this isn't over.
Mhm.
This isn't something that like I only need a couple days or a couple weeks. Like, this is going to be ongoing. And so I'm going to continue to need that support. I think it's hard for people to know what they need. It's hard for the person who is trying to help you, but it's also hard for the person themselves.
Absolutely.
And sometimes, like, we'll talk about just being a presence, but I've had women say, like, yeah, my husband, I'm sitting there crying and saying all these things, and he just hugged me. And it's like, all right, like, I need more than a hug. But then I'll say, like, well, then what did you need? Like, and it's
Mhm.
like, I'm not really sure. It's hard to say, but
Because the reality is nothing. Like
right,
Brene Brown says, rarely does an empathetic response make a difference. It's connection that counts, right?
right, right,
When we're grieving and we are really hurting, we want these magic like answers and words to make us feel better. The reality is somebody that we love died.
right.
And we're not going to get over it. So it's nothing really that's like in that moment, you know, I don't know if there really was a great thing that that spouse could have done.
I know. I know. And
And
that's
that
that's the
sucks.
hard part. That's the hard part. I mean, I do talk to people about, listen, at least try to think of what an ideal would have been. But that's just it. I think people, it's almost as if you could just tell me, in terms of talking to your spouse, that you're going to give me as much time as I need without me feeling judged.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is I've worked with people and their spouses, their partners have given them time, given them time, given them time. Eventually, they do start to feel like that time's running out,
Yep.
and they still feel like they need more time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's hard. I mean, I think if we were to like kind of bullet point it for someone like who's someone who's trying to be supportive would be listening to this. And I've made the same suggestion, like, listen, let's bring them in and make them part of the conversation so they understand. But, first helping anybody understand that, like, this is going to be harder and longer than you think it's going to be, you
Mhm.
know, and secondly, you just need to trust the judgment of the person that you're with. If they're still sad, it's because they're still sad and they need to be sad. They're not wallowing in it. They're not trying to draw this out any longer than they have to. They can't progress any further than they are, and you have to kind of trust them on that. And the one thing that I do hear a lot is that with the passage of time, people feel like they stop asking, how are you, in that way. Like, sure, we wake up, hey, how are you doing? But like, no, in regards to the loss of your mom, the loss of, how are you doing? Like, that's the question a lot of people stopped getting asked, and they want to still be asked that question.
Yeah,
I think
and also
especially from a spouse or partner.
and bring them up.
Yeah,
It's okay to
yeah,
use their name, bring them up.
right,
Be mindful of when their birthday was, when the anniversary of
yes,
their death was.
right,
You know, maybe you put that in your calendar.
yeah.
Maybe you give them a card around that time,
Yeah,
or just acknowledge that you know that that day is coming up and it may be hard. And is there anything they want to do on that day to
yeah,
honor their loved one?
yeah. That's a great one too, because again, even if someone is good about that in the first year, they still second year, third year. And
Oh,
that stuff is really
yeah,
bothersome to
exactly.
people. Like, I can't believe it. Like, this is my mom's birthday or something, and he didn't even say anything. So it just,
Exactly.
yeah, it makes a person feel very alone. What I also do try to remind people though, because I've had people say, like, well, my friends have been great. Like, sometimes I feel like my friends care more or are better to talk to. And I'm like, well, that's why we have friends. And this is why it also kind of reminds us that one person is not really supposed to play all the roles in our life. So
Absolutely.
also to take a little bit of pressure off of that relationship, that your spouse or partner does not have to be your full and only grief support, you know?
And if they, I mean, to be honest, I mean, you have to think about it. Some spouses are just not great listeners,
Yeah,
not great listeners in general. And then when we experience the loss, we expect them to all of a sudden become this great listener.
right.
So I think we have to manage our expectations as well. And, maybe you go to your best friend because they're a better listener.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's okay. But you're getting your needs met. It just may be that you think your needs should be met from your partner, and it may not always be the case.
Absolutely. But maybe think about other ways that your spouse or partner is hopefully meeting
Exactly.
your needs. Are they helping out with things around the house a little
Ex
bit extra? Like, there's a love language that people have that doesn't always come in the form of actual
Mhm.
communication,
Exactly.
so
Yep.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
All right. So, our question that we started with, I'm just going to rephrase it again. And what do you think the key takeaway is? My spouse was initially supportive at first, but now thinks I should be over my grief.
Right. So in terms of again the takeaways from that, I think understanding that if you can communicate to your spouse a little bit more about what this process is like, it will be to your benefit. Sure, it would be nice if everybody could read our minds, but I always say it's like walking into the hairdresser saying nothing and then expecting to get the haircut that you wanted. Like we have to communicate. People can't read our minds, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that's important and encourage them, to be a part of the grief education and the other things that you're learning about and maybe help them understand some of that too.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for watching. Make sure that you follow us on TikTok or subscribe on YouTube for more of our latest videos. Take care.
Thanks, Kelly.